Hey, it's me, Luke, here with another building this thing from scratch, CRUD, MERN, buzzword app thing here. We're picking up right where we left off with coding out that register page and working on our note operations. Finally, the whole purpose of this app has been to build a note-taking application, and we're about to get to that particular part. Booyah! Let's go! I do not have a register view at the moment, so let's already go ahead and add one here, register.tsx. I really need to make some kind of snippet that helps generate one of these is simple, right? Yeah, we'll steal this one right here. We're going to steal the home code to paste it into the register code, and I will now change the name of home to a register. We don't need to have use auth at the moment. We don't need this H1 should just say register view or something like that. Export default register, looking solid, looking good. We're going to add it now to our views index here. Quick little copy and paste, control or command D action, depending on your OS. To add that list right there, we're now going to head to our app.tsx, add it to our list of imported views, register, and we're going to add it now as a path and component right here in our application. We're going to add it to our nav bar so we can actually click and test this thing quickly. Register. Save all the files, let everything compile and rebundle, refresh browser, and voila. Good to go. All right, so register view. It's actually going to be very, very similar to our login view. If we have Postman up and running already, we should have a register route in our collection that we can actually take a look at to see what values our request body is going to have, right? So unlike our login route or view, all we needed was email and password. It looks like we're going to need at least 2 more inputs for the register page that exists on our login page. However, they're going to be extraordinarily similar to each other, except they'll differentiate themselves just in the requests they end up making. So for some laziness, what I can actually do here is probably come and grab some of my login code to reuse the exact same way. So what I might actually choose to do is, copy the div that contains. No, I'll just copy the form for the now. I'll copy the form for now, and we'll simply add some information to it. So I'm going to copy the JSX from my form part of my thing here. We're going to go div, put that in there. Now we have to have the same value and on changes that we learned about in the login page here, right? So scrolling back up, we need to have those. So we have our singular handle changes we can copy right here. Okay, it goes in the scope of the component right there. It needs to also know what that state value is, which is right here. Copy, paste. Bada bing, bada boom. And we need to have that handle submit button. So I'll have my handle click button, and I'm just going to nuke the contents of it. But then again, like now we have everything wired up and good to go. All right, now we can actually test this button here. But I saw an error. What is it? Use state is not imported. So let's go ahead and add it to the top import list. And voila, we have our register form already coded out with email and password. All we have to do now is go back and take a look at what values we needed to add to our form to successfully register a new user. But there we go. Again, like I said, I really need to convert this to read from a paths.json file, so I have to keep on remembering to go to my server to fix this bug. Because now register is our new route here, right? There we go. I think I'll just keep making this error until I get fed up enough to where this stops happening. But there we go. There's our email and our password. Remember, I have the values already filled in, so I don't have to keep on testing this here. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the other 2 properties, which I think were first and last name, right? And they are preceded with underscores. So we'll do first name. Test. Last name. Register, because that's what we're going to be doing here to test our register. And might be jumping back and forth between here and MySQL Workbench to possibly delete any bunk users that I keep generating while I'm doing my testing here, so I don't have a million different tests. We'll do register@test.com for this email, and password 123 is my normal one for testing purposes. For development, not for production. So that doesn't mean go to my websites or my portfolio sites and try guest@test.com, password 123, and pray I forgot to remove a debugging user. I'm going to go check my databases after this video. make sure I don't have those users in production anywhere. But yeah, that completes the values part for pre-filling in our inputs. Now let's go ahead and just copy one of these inputs here. I'm going to choose after password to paste in this one. It'll be type. We'll call it name. Is that a name? Surname? We'll have to look that up here in a moment. Name, we're going to call it the first underscore name because e.target.name was how that was filled in correctly here. Autocomplete values for a name input. Input attributes. What do we have to work with here? I don't remember what they all are. You think I would. Fname, the IDs type. I guess they're just going to be text here. I want to see what the patterns are. Placeholder, required step, blah, blah, blah. Autofocus, height and width, list, autocompletes. Hey, autocompletes. What am I looking at here? Autocomplete on is put it on the form. Wow, except for you can turn it off for certain email ones. What? I wanted more input attributes. Type. I want like a list. All right, cool. Do we have one for like someone's name? Or I'm gonna leave it as text. I don't know. I'm overthinking this. Let's just go leave it as text here. Keep it simple. Drop off autocomplete. First underscore name. Again, I'm an overthinker, and you'd think coding would kind of break that out of me, but alas, I'm not that lucky. I still tend to overthink things that I could just do this for and add later. Again, move fast and break things is the mantra, right? But there we go. We should have the extra 2 input fields now ready to go. Looking good. Again, we'll worry about styling and adding labels after all my core features are done. Then after that styling video where it'll make me want to do things, bad things, because styling is not my strong suit. Once we get through that video, which I can probably mark as like optional, and which I probably shouldn't do. Y'all should watch what I end up styling it wise if you want to follow along with me and learn something. I'm still debating on what CSS kit, if any, I would like to bring in. Either way. Yeah, register right now should simply console log the values, which should be, again, email, first name, last name, password, all with values that aren't in my current database. Over yonder, it matches the request body of this request. So now all we need to do is actually make this request instead of just doing e.prevent defaults. So what do we do from our login page? If you recall, we had our auth service. Log in a user with those values. Then if they promise resolve, that means a login was successful, the token was gotten, put in local storage, and it signed into the private page. If there's an error, it set the error and displayed it beneath the form here, right? So yeah, let's go see our auth service deal with a register request. So to do so, we're going to head to our, not use auth services. And let's add a new function. I'm going to put it in between these here since it's going to be near login user. Register user will be an async function. So we can use try catch and the keyword await. Async, it'll be a very similar payload type that we will receive from the login user, an object with key strings and value strings, as we see right here. This thing is literally just key strings, value strings. It's going to run a try catch. If there's an error, we're going to daisy chain it up so we can do a dot catch and something magical with it in our component, like a modal or a alert that appears or something like that. And what it needs to do is let's take a look at what this registration does. Now, I think this might fail because this email might already be registered. Yeah, so we already got that error that the email address is already registered. Let's head to our database. We're going to select star from users. Okay, and we're going to get the ID value for this row so I can write delete from users where ID equals that. And hopefully this user shouldn't have any posts. If they do, that means I have to go delete their posts first. That is a foreign key relationship, meaning if I try and delete this user and this user has some notes in the notes table referencing their ID, then it's going to tell me I can't do that because, well, this ID is being referenced in a different relationship foreign keyed table. And that is another layer of sanitization that prevents us from deleting huge swaths of data by mistake. It successfully deleted the user because that user didn't have any notes written. So select star from users, a fresh select tells us that the user has now been deleted, which means I can go back over here and confirm that when I register this person, I can take a look at the response. The response is an object with a token inside of it. If we recall, we try to be consistent or as consistent as possible as our login request, which also is an object with property token and the token value as that value, which means I can do the same thing I see right above in login user. I can say destructure the token from base service dot post. Okay, it's a post request to /auth/register, passing the payload up to it. Should it succeed, I need my storage set token to call and set that token value when I register a new user. That should be all we need to set up for this thing here, hopefully. And here's where I'm going to write register user. There we go. All right. Looking good in the neighborhood, folks. Let's see if we can get that working here. Auth service dot, because I'm using defaults because I'm an idiot. Import auth service from up1 services auth. Cool. Auth service dot register user is a promise that takes the values from those inputs, and then it will do something, or it will catch and do something. If it catches, let's just console log the error message so we know what's going on. And if it succeeds, we need to have it also take us somewhere. And if you recall, from the login component, it used my custom function that I brought in from the auth hook. Sign in means that we have successfully gotten a token, and it should sign us in and take us to a certain path. So what does this do here? Okay. It changes the global auth state and navigates us to a certain path. Good to know. So let's go ahead and bring in that custom hook here as well. We'll say import use auth from utilities use auth. And what we're going to do is be like, all right, I need you to stop it. To destructure from the use auth custom hook we have written, I'm going to take that same sign in function and say I'd like you to sign in to the private view after someone successfully registers, right? So I'm doing register at test.com, password 123, test names test register. Looking good in the neighborhood. Let's go ahead and fire off this sucker and see if it works. All right, refresh, register. We're on the private view, so it got there. Oh, it should be profile, not private. Well, it doesn't matter where it actually took us to. I'm dumb. This is my old one, I think, and profiles what I changed it to in the last video. You think I remembered? But yeah, that login part notwithstanding, I should have a successful token in storage here. And if I'm curious as to who it belongs to, I can always go and grab its value. Local storage.get item token. Copy and paste it without the quotes. JSON web token. jwt.io. You think I remember that? That's embarrassing. Paste it. There's the ID right there, and that should match someone in my database. I'm going to copy that ID, where ID equals that value, and it's our test register user. We have successfully registered a new user with our form, and they have successfully been logged in, not only from a context state, because our global auth context should also be telling our application that, hey, app, this individual is authenticated true. They are logged in. All right, we're done checking. They got a token, and we're good to go. That's what I'm talking about. So we have gotten a token. We've told our global auth context this user is now registered, and they can successfully view their profile page, and they are good to go. Well, all right then. We can now register users. We can log them in. I think it's finally time we get to doing some notes. The whole purpose of this freaking app this whole time, and we're finally just now getting to it. Now, I have a messy workspace here, and because we're done with a lot of these things, what I'm going to do is choose to close all editors. And there used to be a collapse all. There used to be a collapse. There it is. I'm going to collapse all my directories so I can get a fresh start back in source client, have the server folder closed. Again, I like doing this kind of when I move to client-side code, keeping a fresh state of mind by not trying to get confused with server-side code. Very good advice I give to a lot of my newbie students that tend to struggle going, oh, God, where was I again? What was I working on? Especially in these mono repos. It can be tough to jump back and forth and not cause accidents along the way. But there we go. Looking good. So let's go ahead and finally add our notes. .tsx. I should have had something simple to copy again. I really need to make a template so this becomes easier to deal with here. But, okay. Keyword home can be replaced by Notes, this is going to be for displaying and viewing notes, is going to be where my mind is headed here. So let's add notes view to our list. Now that has been added, I'm going to add it to my index. Notes. Okay. And now I'm going to add it to my application. So I'm going to add it to my app as a route. I'm going to remember from what we did a moment ago, I have to add this to my back end as well. Now, eventually I'm going to make it to like I will make it into a, what's it called? Like a nested path, because we're going to have several, right? But for now, I'm going to make each one individual. I'm going to say element equals my notes element, or component rather, not element. There we go. So there's that. And we're gonna nest some routes here in a later video when we get to more advanced like routing logic and things like that. But for now, I'm just gonna make them individual views just to make my life easy for the video tutorial and for y'all learning along with me. Server, add it. Single source of truth, Luke. You talk about it, yet you're not doing it because you lazy. Welcome to coding, right? I made a choice to be lazy, and now I'm paying for it constantly. Okay. Now that's been added, we can add it to our navbar component as well to confirm it's there. Again, this will be also easy if I just added it to the navbar, because that means I would also have these links auto-generate from an array somewhere. Notes. Boom. All right. Let's confirm that I can go and view this thing. That's the most important part here. I'm going to argue that the notes, I mean, it may as well be a public view. Do I have to be logged in to view notes? No, but I should be viewing everyone's notes is the question. For now, let's say yes. I say I can view anyone's notes. You might not like that, but we could always later on add something to this request, whether it's a route parameter, like maybe we'll add someone's like user ID and we'll put /user, and that will get their user ID notes, for example, right? So that's something we could do right there. Or if we pass the ID like we did before, we can get individual notes. So we got that going on. For now, let's just get and display these things because we've been talking about it for so long. So these are a public request. They don't require any kind of token to retrieve. I'm not going to worry about that because my services should have that built out for me. I'm going to do notes.ts. We're going to import base service from the base file. That's what I called it in the auth file, right? Just to be consistent. Yeah, I did. Probably not going to be storing anything here, so no need for storage, but let's go ahead and write our utilities here. Export defaults. Okay, cool. Const get all notes equals an async function that shouldn't take any arguments for now until I decide otherwise. Daisy chain the error for UX purposes in the long run. And let's go ahead and get our list of notes. Await base service.get to forward API notes. Second postman, double check our work. API notes, get request. Gets us what? It gets us an array of objects. Looks good to me. Okay, so that should be enough for that. I'm not going to do any destructuring because I want the array of objects. Maybe this is where I would filter out this user's notes, for example, if we're going to choose to do that. Like, again, I like to include business logic away from my components wherever possible. But for now, we're going to return whatever these notes happen to be after this promise successfully goes through. Get all notes right there as our singular export. And now we're going to head to the notes component and bring this stuff in. Okay, so import notes service from services notes. We're going to be getting this information and setting it to state, a classic React wombo combo. Get in the comments if you get that reference. Const notes set notes equals use state. Oh boy, I'll have to define what a note is. And I'm kind of lazy, so you know what we're going to do? We're going to do the classic. There. That's really hacky, I know, but I'm telling you it's going to be an array of objects, basically, for now. And, you know, what we could do is we could make a types that coincides with what our notes are on the back, but I'm not going to bother doing that for now. For now, we're just going to keep it kind of simple right there. And we're going to be fetching this data and the common approach until you use a library, which I would recommend you do in a real case project. But again, we're learning from the ground up here to the best of our ability. Is typically done inside of a use effect. And a use effect is ran after an initial render. So the initial render will show an H1 that says notes view. It'll run the use effect, which will run an asynchronous function, asynchronous get request, which will then update state. The state will trigger the change and then render the list of notes beneath that H1. So here it is. Use effect runs on page load and never again, or until we otherwise specify. Then it needs to run a call to note service.getAllNotes. Then whatever data comes back, set that to state, otherwise catch an error. And for now, we're going to console log error.message. And again, I think this is actually redundant because I have a console log of the error message from my base service. So these are all redundant, I'm pretty sure. But that's as simple as it needs to be. Let's go make sure that this component can do its job successfully. So notes view, refresh. Did it work? Well, let's go check out our component dev tools. Yeah, I have a state, an array of objects right here. So, and they only have a body and a first name. So maybe we can put like the person's name that wrote it and then the note body beneath it. I don't know. Let's throw in a div. Inside that div, we're going to say, hey, take the notes variable, which is an array, which it does recognize that thanks to my measly TypeScript right here, and say, please map to this array, and for each individual note, I would like to implicit return the following. So no keyword, no curly braces, keyword return, we're dropping curly braces, drop keyword return, implicit multi-line return instead of parentheses, to say, please return another div with a header inside of that. That should be the note.first name or whoever wrote it. And beneath that, just one dumb paragraph that will be each note.body in this paragraph tag. And there's our return. We're going to get an error from this. Anyone that's done some React or even my students should know why. But let's go take a look at it. There you go. So we do technically get a flicker, right? We see the H1 notes view is the initial render. Then it makes the async call, gets the notes, sets them to state, and updates. So that's why we get that flicker, right? We can talk about ways to handle that later. But for now, the flicker is okay in my book. Now, we do get an error saying, hey, each child in the list should have a unique key prop. This is a common error you're going to see all through your career unless you know what you're about to encounter. And that is that React is, again, it is not anything in the DOM. It is not a collection of elements that have familial relationships like parent, child, etc. React is basically a giant, messy tree of objects where each object in that series of objects represents a parent element, any props on it, any state on it, any effects on it, what its contents is, and what type of element it represents, right? So this is a massive tree of objects that happens to render to HTML that we see. But if we think this is a giant mess of objects, right, then how does the notes component differentiate between this note and this note? It does not. We need to differentiate these objects in the React tree of objects somehow. And that is done via keys, because React only wants to re-render exactly what it needs to re-render, right? And the only way it can differentiate between these elements is if we give them some kind of unique identifying key that it can then re-render. Because if I add a new note that happens to go in between these, it couldn't, without a key, it couldn't know that, and it would have to re-render everything. But if I add a unique key in here, it'll only have to re-render the one element instead of the entire tree. It would have to re-render. That's the purpose of keys, to help React know what uniquely needs to get re-rendered, if at all. So we can say, use each note's ID, which should be intensely unique, a UUID v4 value right there. That should be unique enough. I personally like doing the following. I even like adding up some string values in there to really give them unique key names as well. And I also can look at the key names and know what they're trying to tell me. But all that work will remove that one common error you'll see right there. So, all right, there we go. Now, viewing all the notes, what's the purpose of like a detailed view? Like, let's say the notes are really long. These are small note examples. So let's do something kind of cheesy here. I think it's slice 0. And we'll say the first 25 characters and some ellipses right there. We're just going to make a copy of that string value and show it the first 25 characters of each note. That's not that many. This is like simulating. How about we show our users a preview of the note itself, right? And then maybe between the title and the preview text, we'll have a button that says get details. View full note. I don't know. I just work here, man. I don't know these things. Right, so view full note. We see the preview. Oh, that's the one I want. We're going to click on view full note. What that should do is that should take us to a notes details view where we will actually display the full note itself, right? This is just a preview of them. Okay, that looks pretty good. So how is this going to work, right? Well, what I want to have happen here is I want this button to link us over to a new view. So we're going to call that the notes details view. So I'm going to make a new component here by copying the home one as always. We'll call it notes details.tsx, paste her in. Probably not going to need off. Keep the props. Boom, 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 boom. Notes details? Is that what I called it? Notes details? That's a dumb name. It should be note details. Playing with fire, making decisions like this. There we go. And fixing them on the fly like that. All right, cool. Looking good. Now that we have that, we can add it to our index list here. Note details. And we can now go add it to our app. That sounds like a pretty good path name. It'll be interesting to see what the backend will think of this as a path name as well. We shall see. Okay. And this will be note details. I need to add that. Oh, it'll import it for me from my list of views. All right. We got that in there. Now we can give her a whirl to see what's going to happen here, right? So again, like the name details afterwards doesn't even have to be there. We can just leave it as notes/:id, which will mean we're getting a individual notes details. The important part is how do we route to it? We need to route to it with each ID of each note. The only way we can access each ID of each note is through the array map. For those of you wondering why I didn't get an error, I forgot to explain this. I chose to initialize my state before my first render even as an empty array. That means that empty array.map does not throw an error. Had we choose to gone with null, for example, I will have to account for that by writing an optional chain to say, hey, if notes is null, don't attempt to do a .map because it will fail. But if I chose to initialize my state as an empty array.map is not an error, it just maps through nothing. So all they see is that h1, initial render done, use effect fires, update state, re-renders with new state, and the array map is now succeeding. Okay. All right. With that in mind, we can now change up our button to instead be exactly what we're using in the nav bar, aka a link component from React Router DOM. Import link from Linkovich Chamovsky link from React Router DOM, and we can put it inside of our button, or we can wrap the button. We can wrap it in the button or something like that, and style it however we need to have it see fit. So where is it going to is the question. I'm going to be doing a template literal, so I choose to do so with that escape TSX or escape JSX backticks for template literal rather than a string concatenation method or anything like that. It's going to be /notes/ and this note ID should take us to that link, and that gets us to that view page, hopefully with any luck. So refresh Areno. Notes details view, I see it up there in the URL bar. I can't zoom in on that though, so apologies. But if I take a look at my note details view, well, I'm not going to see it there because the route provider hasn't provided the route yet. I haven't hooked into that hook. Hooked into the hook. Yeah, so what we want to do here is we're going to need to know what is the ID of the note. How do I get that information into this component? We are going to do so with a hook from React Router DOM that's coded for us. Called, is it use match or is it use params? Use params. Use params is going to be the hook that gets us the ID. How does it know that ID is a string? Well, everything in the URL bar must be interpreted as a string. Even if it's a collection of numbers, it'll be given to you as a string value in code. Remember that for TypeScript purposes. Any parameter from an URL bar, string value. Now, this ID we can use to our benefit in this component, right? Let's go ahead and see if it's correct or not. I'm going to console log the ID, keep it nice and simple here for debugging. Refresh is going to fail because the backend doesn't know this path. I'm going to, losing my mind here, folks. Now here's something I'm actually curious about. Will it recognize if I have that? Will it recognize that pattern from this array? I mean, I imagine it would. It does. Good to know. All right, so yeah, check it out. There's the ID. Why did I call it ID? It can be whatever you want. If we chose :pizza here in this route, :pizza instead of ID, then we would have to reference it as pizza in this variable right here. We're making up a variable name. That's all we're doing. So why am I bothering with this? Because we have to fetch that note's details. And you're wondering, Luke, don't you have the full note details here? And can't you just pass that along in a stateless fashion? We can. And I'm going to do that in a separate video because that has its own drawbacks, right? So let's say we don't have the details of the note when we get to this page. Like maybe I copy this link and I'm like, dude, check out this sick note I wrote. And you open your own Chrome browser and you paste in that note and you hit enter. You didn't get here with a link. Well, technically you did. You didn't get here via clicking a link component. You got here by making a GET request to my server that will serve the index HTML page that will have my React code that will find the ID in the URL bar and fetch those details. So you're going to have to write that code either way to make sure that if they navigated to this page via a copy-pasted link and not by clicking our link element, or link component, that's what we have to worry about, okay? So now that we have the ID, we need to now get the notes details. Again, close the server, be consistent, close the index, we're done there. Close this, we're done there. Notes service. Okay, getting a individual notes details. Let's see what that looks like. Get all notes details. API notes / the node ID makes sense to me. It retrieves to us, not an array, but an object this time. Makes sense. Okay, so what we're going to do is say const get one note equals async. We're going to pass in an ID string argument here. Try catch. Daisy chain the error. Const note equals await base service. Nope, await base service dot get template literal API notes ID. That way it gets that singular note ID. No destructuring needed here since we did it on the back end. And now I need you to return this note to us here and add it to my list of exported values. Get one note. Cool. All right, now that we get that one note, how do we use this service here? Let's go ahead and import it in. Import note service from up1 services notes. We're going to have to set it to state so we can trigger a re-render to display it, fetch it from a use effect, and there we go. Details, set details, use state. Now, empty object should be fine for our initialized state here. We'll see how I feel about that in a moment. We're going to cheese it with a key string, any, because most of them are going to be strings, but I could have numbers in the future. But there we go. Right, they're just saying, hey, we've got an empty object to start with so we don't cause any render errors because I can't render empty objects. Now, if you have nested properties, an empty object may not work, so let's just default this to null for now and say, hey, we don't have it yet, but it's going to be an object when we get it. That will allow me to do a simple trick for my render to not have errors. Well, I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. Fetch it on this. I like to include the ID inside of there, even though it's probably not going to trigger this to happen. I like just including the route parameter in there. Makes it so if the route parameter changes without our, somehow that it will trigger the re-render to make sure it's uniquely, like if there's not some like weird redirect that doesn't happen to trigger a new render. That happens a lot in React Native apps that you have to account for. Woo! Been talking a lot today. Note service dot get one note. Pass in the ID, please. Then catch redundant error message. Otherwise, whatever data returns, please call set details with that data. Let's go take a look here, folks. It should be looking good. All right. Refresh, should have fetched it. Check our component tree, note details. Don't know why it does that. Yeah, I got the note details right there in state. So now I'm safe to render. Now here's what I meant by not causing an error. If I chose an empty object and I come down yonder and I'm like, hey div, render an H2 that renders the details.firstname of whoever wrote this note. That's fine. That's not an error right there. Why is that not an error? It renders it now, but it does not render and cause a crash because an empty object's property of .first_name doesn't return an error. That's what I'm doing. Why are you not showing me what I want it to show? I see how it is. Okay. Yeah, this is what I'm expecting to see. An empty object.firstName represented by this empty set of curly braces is emblematic of this initialized state. The test initial state of empty curly braces, aka empty object, of a property of first name does not return an error, it returns undefined. Undefined is a value that React will not render, meaning we see guess right now because it successfully ran that use effect. Let me comment that note service out and let it save and recompile and refresh the page. And again, you'll see that there's no error being rendered. It's rendering undefined, which renders as nothing. So that's not a problem. Now, what if our notes had a different structure? What if our note structure was a nested object of some kind? What if our structure actually looked like this? Name, subobject, first, Luke, right? Let's say our object looked like this. Okay? If that's what our structure looks like, then I would do test.name.first, dang it, .first to get Luke. No problem there. But let's go back to our original initialized state. Our initial state is an empty object. But let's say I wanted to render the test.name.first if it was that nested structure. Test.name.first. Now, test.name already returns undefined because there is no name property in our initial state of an empty object. Now, undefined.first is where we see this classic error that I have to help my students with all the time. Cannot read property as undefined reading first. You have to ask yourself, why is my daisy chain property, first, adding itself to something that's undefined? So why is test.name undefined? Oh, it's because my object structure of an empty object is not good for nested data, right? That's where that error will come into play. So to fix that, you could do something akin to the following, right? So now the optional chain operator prevents it from adding .first onto undefined. You simply test each step along the way to make sure you have a truthy value. And undefined is falsy, which means it will not chain on .first. We could also choose to simply come up here, add null, and optional chain our way to victory, or add some kind of condition that doesn't even render this until it has a truthy value. Meaning we could always do details and short circuit, and then the rest of our work. That way we don't have to add the optional chain every step along the way. Just have that one condition up top that renders everything down below. Okay, now we have that paragraph. Details.body. Yay! Maybe we'll have some small text that will render details.created at so we know when this note was written. We're going to be bringing in a library to parse that out for us here. But again, this is our register, our details view, and it's looking good. We know who wrote it, we know when it was written, we know the body of the note, and we can view a preview of all of them and find asset effects. There we go. Maybe have a back button somewhere here as well. So let's go ahead and bring in from React Router DOM our link component. Beneath all this mess, we'll have another div that will have our link component. We'll have some text that says go back to /notes. That way it takes us back. And there we go. That's a nice little feature we can add there as well. All right, ability drained. There we go. We are getting notes. We viewing them details. And now it is time to begin. Do I have the energy for this even? It's already 40 minutes long. Let's do post. I'm gonna keep this one a bit shorter. We're gonna keep this one 100 today, and we're gonna keep it a bit shorter. We've done some good work here so far. My voice is just very dry from a lot of recording today. I'm gonna choose to take a break, and in the next video, I'll show y'all how we're gonna add and edit notes. Okay, so ta-ta for now. Great work so far. Get in the comments. If you have questions or you want features that I want me to add and talk about in the future, again, I promise we'll get to styling this thing eventually when I decide on what I want to do. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fun YouTube stuff. Love that y'all are watching this. Hopefully someone can, like, someday get in our Discord or in the comments, just link me their deployed version of their site to see what kind of crazy stuff y'all come up with. So